but Deshaun Watson started off absolute arse. He started. Shedeur is just the most consistent quarterback, right?
Okay, this is not a normal news day for the Indiana Fever. A sitting state representative just went on live television and put Stephanie White's name in the same sentence as accountability, federal concern, and cancel culture. Not a blogger, not a random account, a lawmaker. And within the hour, a rumor was flying around that she'd already been fired. I'm going to walk you through exactly what was said, what's actually true, and why this thing is nowhere close to over. Let's back up, because this situation escalated fast. What started as frustration over how Stephanie White handled her own locker room has turned into something bigger than basketball. We've had a lieutenant governor speaking out publicly. Now we've got a state representative on record. And the tone from that camp is basically that Indiana needs to distance itself from how she's running this team. And here's the part that makes it sting even more. Stephanie White isn't some outsider brought in from another program. She's Indiana through and through, a former Miss Indiana basketball, somebody who grew up in the state's basketball culture. Now she's the one getting criticized by politicians and by media inside her own backyard. Think about the position that puts her in. Every time she leaves a practice facility, there's a cameras on her. Every quote gets dissected. That's the kind of pressure that changes how a coach operates, whether she admits it publicly or not. And they've got another game tonight. Nobody wants more drama layered on top of drama. The hope from fans, and honestly for me too, is that Caitlin Clark gets to go out there and just hoop at a high level, and that this roster stays focused enough to chase a championship instead of chasing headlines. But the noise didn't come from nowhere. A lot of people are pointing straight at Stephanie White's own decisions as the reason this blew up into a full-blown WNBA problem. The claim going around is that White filed a complaint tied to DJ Carrington that ended up landing on Sophie Cunningham, and that if she'd handled that differently, none of this reaches a state representative's desk. The argument is simple. If White had stood behind Caitlin Clark the way people expected, this news cycle probably doesn't exist. And that's really the frustrating part for a lot of Fever fans watching this unfold. This isn't an outside coach coming in, made an unpopular call, and got roasted by people who don't know the program. This is Indiana's own basketball daughter, somebody who bled orange and black long before she ever coached a single game for this franchise, now getting painted as the problem by people from her own state. That contrast is exactly why this story has legs. It's not just sports talk anymore. It's local politics, it's identity. It's a hometown hero getting second-guessed by other hometown figures. And I'll say this plainly. Nobody wants to see a coach's career turned into a political football. That's not good for the Fever, it's not good for the league, and honestly, it's not good for Caitlin Clark either, because all of this noise pulls attention away from what should be the actual story, which is a historically talented point guard trying to lead a franchise to a title. But you can't just ignore it either, because when a sitting representative starts talking about federal accountability, that's a different level of pressure than anything a fan account or a talk show host can generate. Instead, we've now got a second Indiana lawmaker stepping into this conversation on camera. And once you see the clip, you'll understand why this isn't fading anytime soon.
Day 12 of Brown's training camp, and Shedeur ran with the twos, but still delivered some dots. Now, look, I won't lie to y'all, man. Y'all know I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't have the quarterback tracker yet, but Deshaun Watson started off absolute arse. He started bad. Deshaun Watson threw a pick. And then Gabriel threw a pick, and Shedeur was seeming very tight today. He threw a lot of contested catches. There was a lot of catches that Shedeur made great throws on that, maybe Denzel Boston might catch it. Yeah, no, actually, Denzel Boston did drop some of the passes. It's the craziest thing ever. But this catch to Brandon Bates, phenomenal catch by Brandon Bates. The placement for Shedeur today.
Hold on. Read that back. A state lawmaker just said this rises to the level of a federal concern. That's not a fan take. That's a policy position. So let's actually sit with what Stutzman said, because it's more specific than a lot of people are giving it credit for. He's not just venting. He says he's one of 11 signers on a formal letter sent directly to the WNBA commissioner demanding accountability for how player safety has been handled this season. That's 11 people with actual political standing putting their names on paper. His argument is that ever since Caitlin Clark arrived in this league, she's been targeted physically on the court, and that officiating hasn't kept pace with protecting her. He brings up the incident where she took a hit to the neck and no foul was called in the moment. He frames it as a pattern, not a one-off, and he says that pattern is exactly why he felt the need to say something publicly, even knowing critics would say lawmakers shouldn't be refereeing a basketball game. And that's the tension right there. Stutzman's response to that criticism is basically that this isn't really about officiating a game, it's about a workplace environment, and about a player who's been pulled out of games because of injuries that trace back to physical play that wasn't called. Whether you agree with a politician weighing in or not, that's the case he's making on camera, in his own words. Now think about what it means for 11 state and federal adjacent voices to coordinate a letter like that. That's not a spur-of-the-moment tweet. That takes staff time. It takes drafting. It takes 11 separate offices agreeing the language is worth putting their name on. Whatever you think of the substance, the process alone tells you this isn't a fringe complaint. It's organized pressure aimed directly at the commissioner's desk, and it's happening while Stephanie White is still the head coach, trying to steer this team through a playoff push. And Stutzman isn't hiding from the obvious pushback either. He acknowledges right there on camera that critics are going to say politicians shouldn't be anywhere near officiating decisions in a basketball game. His counter is that this stopped being purely a basketball question the moment player safety became the headline. He's essentially arguing that once you're talking about a player getting pulled from games because of hits that weren't penalized, you're not debating a foul call anymore. You're debating a duty of care. That's the framing he's leaning on to justify getting involved at all. Now here's where things got even messier. Right around this same window, a rumor started spreading that Stephanie White had already been fired. The claim was that just 1 hour after the day's press interviews, the Fever had moved on from their head coach entirely. For a few minutes, that was the headline everyone was reacting to.
It's the media members, and it's the come on, as he tries to find Denzel Bond in one-on-one coverage. And as Daniel Oyefusi, he was there in person. I watched it, but he's there in person. He says Trey Avery just had a real good rep, was a step behind Denzel Boston on a go route along the sideline. Shedeur Sanders put it right on the money, but Avery stuck with it and was able to get a hand to dislodge it. Now, Avery has been playing some decent football. Some of the starting corners have been out. I don't believe Denzel Ward was in today, but again, Shedeur was going against the twos regardless. But I think this one was one of the 7-on-7 reps when he went against the ones, and a really good ball. He had lots of really good balls. Wow.
Hey, yo, what?
That just got dropped. But at the end of the day, when you're with the twos, you're gonna have limited reps. Things aren't gonna always go the right way.
So no, she was not fired. But the fact that a firing rumor spread that fast tells you exactly how hot this situation has gotten. People are primed to believe it. With that rumor shut down, the bigger story shifts to how the league itself is handling all of this. And that's where Christine Brennan comes in. She's the USA Today columnist who wrote On Her Game, a book specifically about Caitlin Clark and the shift happening in women's sports. And she's been tracking this closely since Clark entered the league. On CNN, Brennan was asked directly whether Commissioner Kathy Engelbert punting this whole situation to a task force instead of issuing a clear decision was the right move. Her answer was blunt. No, it's not the right call. She said Engelbert has struggled to navigate the pile of issues that have come with what she called the Caitlin Clark era, these last 3 years where interest in the league has exploded. Brennan's point was that other great players never got this level of attention before, and now every issue gets thrown onto that same spotlight because of how much the audience has grown. Then Brennan brought up something a lot of fans don't realize. FIBA, the international governing body for basketball, already has a policy in place that determines who can compete in their events. She pointed out that Clark and 11 other players are set to represent the U.S. at the World Cup next month under that international rule set. Her argument was that it's almost shocking the WNBA hasn't adopted anything close to matching that international standard, and that simply following the same framework FIBA already uses would be a clear, defensible path for Engelbert to take instead of stalling behind a task force. What makes this part of the interview stick is how simple Brennan makes the fix sound. She's not asking the WNBA to invent new policy from scratch. She's pointing at a rulebook that already exists, one that's already being used at the highest level of international competition, the exact competition Clark and 11 of her fellow players are about to represent the country in. So the question Brennan keeps circling back to is basically, why would the domestic league operate under a different, murkier standard than the international one its own players are about to compete under in a few weeks? That gap is the part she says Engelbert hasn't adequately explained. And that's not a small logistical detail either. We're talking about a World Cup roster forming in the next month under one set of rules, while the league these same players spend the rest of their year in operates under a completely different, less defined process. Brennan's framing is that this isn't some hypothetical down-the-road decision. It's an active contradiction happening in real time, right as the Fever and the rest of the league try to navigate this controversy.
This was Deshaun Watson's throw of the day, because even his deep balls, the deep balls that were going down there. I'm sorry. The deep balls were kind of like that with Cedric Tillman, where it's like, hey, blown coverage. Even shout out Dylan Gabriel, he also got a deep touchdown, blown coverage. Like the cornerbacks ran into each other. But regardless, DG got a touchdown. Shout out DG. But this is his, I think, throw of today, because this was really good. We saw him do a similar throw like this Saturday with Casey Concepcion, or KC. I'm just calling him Casey because I keep butchering his name. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, releases that thing and then comes uncovered. We talk about throwing with anticipation. We talk about what are the advantages for Deshaun Watson, right? Being a veteran, XYZ. Some of those advantages is throwing this ball as Deshaun Watson, as Jerry Jeudy is thinking about breaking. He hasn't even fully crossed the face of this defender. The ball is already out. I mean, the ball gets to Jerry Jeudy as he crosses Emmanuel McNeil-Warren's face. And that
FIBA already has a rule book for this. The WNBA is choosing a task force instead of a rule book. That's the comparison Brennan is drawing, and it's a hard one to argue with. Brennan didn't stop there. She was asked directly, given everything, does she actually expect Engelbert to make a real decision here? Her response basically was that this league has been paralyzed on a lot of fronts under Engelbert's leadership. And she called that a shame because Engelbert came in with a strong resume, a top executive at Deloitte, someone who broke through in a male-dominated industry. But Brennan said that resume hasn't translated into decisive leadership on issues like this one. Then she zoomed out and gave some historical context that a lot of people forget. She brought up Colin Kaepernick and reminded everyone that the WNBA, led by players like Maya Moore, was actually out in front on activism a full month before Kaepernick's kneeling became a national story. Brennan's larger point is that the WNBA has always been an activist league. She cited the league's demographics, roughly 74% black and somewhere between 30 and 40% of players identifying as gay, and said that combination makes the league genuinely progressive-minded on most issues, which is exactly why this current situation is such a bind for Engelbert. Brennan argued that this particular debate doesn't fit neatly into that same progressive lane, so Engelbert essentially has to sell a policy shift to a locker room that's largely going to be sympathetic to the opposite side of the argument. Brennan even connected it to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, noting that once a federal executive order came down on this exact topic, the USOPC, which is federally chartered, had to fall in line. Her read is that gives the WNBA political cover if Engelbert wants to use it. Whether she actually will is still an open question. Brennan's larger point, when you step back from all of it, is that this league has never been shy about taking a stand before. She made that clear with the Kaepernick comparison, and honestly, most people watching probably didn't know the WNBA had that history of being ahead of the curve on activism. But being ahead of the curve on one issue doesn't automatically mean the league's locker room and the league's political reality line up perfectly on every single issue that comes next. That's the bind Brennan is describing. A league built on player-driven activism now has to make a call that a meaningful chunk of its own locker room may not want on a topic where the international president is already sitting there, unused. And that's the piece I think gets lost in a lot of the shouting online. This isn't Engelbert facing a simple yes or no question with an obvious answer.
According to Brennan, it's a commissioner trying to balance international precedent, a federal executive order her sister organization already had to comply with, and a players' association that leans hard in a different direction, all while a state representative from Indiana is publicly demanding accountability tied to a completely separate but overlapping controversy involving her own head coach. So think about the spot Engelbert is actually in. She's got international precedent on one side and a locker room that leans a completely different way politically on the other. That's the needle she has to thread, not us. Let's put the whole picture together. This started as backlash over how Stephanie White handled a filing tied to DJ Carrington and Sophie Cunningham. It grew into a lieutenant governor speaking out. Then a sitting state representative, Marlon Stutzman, went on camera saying he's one of 11 lawmakers who signed a formal letter to the WNBA commissioner demanding accountability, tying it directly to how Caitlin Clark has been treated on the court. In the middle of all that, a false rumor spread that White had already been fired, which tells you how combustible this story has become. And now Christine Brennan is publicly saying Commissioner Kathy Engelbert is stalling behind a task force instead of pointing to the FIBA standard that's sitting right there, while also explaining exactly why that's such a difficult needle for her to thread, given who the league actually is. Stephanie White is at the center of every layer of this, and none of it looks like it's cooling off before tonight's game. So here's where it stands. Stephanie White has not been fired, but she's now tangled up in a story that's pulled in state lawmakers, a best-selling author, and the WNBA commissioner's office all at once. And the question Commissioner Engelbert has to answer isn't going away just because a task force got announced. I want to hear from you. Do you think Kathy Engelbert should just adopt the FIBA standard and settle this? Or do you think a task force is genuinely the smarter move here, given how divided the league is? Drop it in the comments, and let's talk about it. Smash like and subscribe.